Welcome back to the Tessa Tubbs Podcast, the place where high-capacity leaders get real, do the inner work, and sharpen the tools they use to influence both work and life. Today's guest is someone I've known and respected for years, Ed Holinski. Ed is a leader and developer of leaders. He's currently the Chief Development Officer for Vistage Michigan and brings decades of experience coaching executives to cut through the noise and lead with clarity. Thank you for joining us today, Ed.
I'm delighted to be here with you, Tessa. You're one of my favorite people, and this is one of my favorite topics, so I've been looking forward to it.
Ed, I feel the same way, and I'm excited to dive into the topic today, which is really about what it means to lead yourself first, how managing the internal noise and mental sabotage can unlock powerful, grounded leadership. This isn't about buzzwords or perfection. It's about self-awareness. It's about intentional practice and the ripple effect it creates when you build a team around a healthier, more aligned version of yourself. When we prepped for the conversation today, I was really excited because we connected around the journey we have all been on of self-awareness and getting healthier and how that allows us to lead better and more effectively when we do that inner work first. So I'd love to start here. When you talk about leadership, you often emphasize the importance of getting right with yourself first. Can you share what that means to you and what has shaped that perspective in your journey?
Yeah, Tessa, thank you. That's a great opening question. So I think many leaders aspire to be like other leaders who they've read about and admire. And in so few cases can someone really replicate someone else's leadership style and behavior and do that successfully. So my belief is that you're better served by understanding yourself, understanding your strengths and weaknesses, continuing to work on those opportunities and getting better and better, and being right with yourself first, and then trying to lead others by engaging them in something that's going to make a difference in their lives and for a broader group of people.
I love that. And I know you're probably like me, we're reading a lot these days about burnout. And I think some of that burnout comes from us trying to be people we're not. And I'm curious, as you talk about the importance of getting right with self, how have you seen this show up in leaders who are thriving versus those who are burning out?
Yeah, those who are thriving, I think, get a great deal of gratification from doing what they do, but also recognizing it's having an impact on lives around them. And I think that drives them and continues to keep them nourished when they see people doing better around them versus just doing for themselves. I think those who are burning out feel they need to do something sometimes for externally imposed purposes versus it coming from their heart. And in many cases, they may not be doing it to better the lives of people around them. They're doing it for something they feel is important for them individually. And I think that over the long term seems to be more of a losing game than when you are in it to help others get better.
That resonates for me. I mean, I know when we talked a few weeks ago, we were talking about our own journey, right, as leaders and what, the avatars we put on when we were in our 20s and 30s versus shedding all of that and really embracing who we are and leading from, a greater place of authenticity. Just to sort of pick up on that, it would be great if you could share with us what were some pivotal moments when you had to do that inner reset for yourself, and what did you discover through that process?
I think we all have moments of humility that we go through in our lives. And, early in my career, I probably have always had a healthy ego, right? And a motivation to do some things that I thought made a difference. But many cases, it was me imbued with the mission of doing that and not paying attention to others around me as much as I could have. And I think when we went through our collective hit the wall in 2000, 2008 was when our run was together, but really the financial crisis of '08, I think that was a humbling moment for many people, including myself, where I was offloaded by a large organization I've been part of for quite a while. Felt that I created and added great value to that organization, but it allowed me some reflection and introspection to say it's not all about that role with that
Mm.
company, right? It gave me an opportunity to rethink what I was doing and go through a number of different roles to end up where I'm at today, which have all contributed to me finding a more meaningful career in life.
Yeah, that resonates for me. Similarly to you, and the tail end of that financial crisis in 2014, I actually stepped away from my corporate role after 20 years or so to take care of an aging parent. And what I thought was going to be 3 months turned into 3 years away from corporate. And to your point, right, the thing that was the most jarring was the loss of my identity as an executive of a pick the brand name logo. And suddenly I'm interacting with people just as Tessa, not Tessa head of or Tessa's SVP of. And it really was humbling, not just my own understanding of how much my identity was wrapped up in things that, you know, I didn't realize it was wrapped up in, but equally as I interacted with others and how much their willingness or how they engaged with me changed as that logo or that brand or that, tagline shifted. And so I'm curious, you've talked a lot about positive intelligence, and it makes me think about, right, like what happens, the mental conversations and the narratives that we have with ourselves, and sometimes they don't serve us. And when you go through changes like you described, you went through that I'm describing, I went through, it's that mental conversation that can make or break you.
Yeah.
And so, for listeners who aren't maybe as familiar with positive intelligence, tell us what it's all about and what are some of the common saboteurs that show up for senior leaders?
Positive intelligence was transformational for me. I started on the journey probably 4 years or so ago to first go through it, learn a little bit about it as part of a cohort. Later went through and got certified, and I've taken probably 40 or so leaders through the program over the course of the last few years. And for many of them, it's been transformational as well. The basic concept is that we all have chatter. Many times it's unconscious, so we don't pay attention to it, but we're talking to ourselves regularly all day long. And what we don't realize is much of the time that's negative chatter. There are a lot of voices saying you can't do that, you shouldn't do that. Here's the risk in that versus go for it and try it and do something different. And what positive intelligence gives people the opportunity to do is think consciously about those negative voices, recognize why they exist and where they come from in our past, and then give us the opportunity or ability to change gears, to stop and say, okay, I know that's my saboteur again. I need to shift and go into curiosity, exploration, more positive modes as opposed to talking to myself negatively. And they have a cast of characters that they identify, or archetypes that are part of that. In my case, my greatest driver was the hyperachiever, which many of us are. That was number 1 out of 10 for me.
Mhm.
And I, at an early age, learned that the way I could earn recognition and have an identity was to achieve things. I came from a family of 8 children, and the way to stand out was to do something that you excelled in that made you recognized and appreciated. And that's okay, but it takes away from you valuing yourself as a person just for being versus doing. And so what it gave me the opportunity to do is recognize that many times that's fear-based, right? If I'm not doing a lot of things, if I'm not doing them really well, I'm not going to get recognized as a high achiever, and I will be letting myself and others down around me. And I've started to learn to deal with that in a more constructive way, to feel like ambition's not a bad thing, but it should be driven intrinsically by positive forces where I really want to make a difference in lives and feel engaged and motivated by that passion.
I love that. As you share that story, it makes me think of a time I was leading a group of executives through a leadership development program, and it was targeted towards leaders of leaders, and it was leaders all across South America. We were in Brazil at the time, and as an American, like you're describing, growing up with a lot of these messages around achievement and always aiming for the next thing and always sort of rising above. At the time, the World Cup was playing and Brazil was in the World Cup. And so, we got this rigorous program for a week going on. And there was a point where the leaders came up to us. There was a handful of us who were there leading that effort and facilitating the class. And they asked if they could take a break in the day to watch the World Cup game, to watch Brazil play. And I remember thinking, like, that's just crazy to me. Like, in an American context, you would never, not even for a second, ask. You would want to do it, but you would never actually ask to take the break. And we ended up giving it to them. We worked through, like, everyone stayed later. We worked around it. But it was the first time for me, I needed that cultural experience to step back and say to myself, like, what am I really doing here? Right? Like, they were still able to be good leaders, learn content, but they also built in things that created joy and fun, and they just wanted to be with one another. There was just an element of collectiveness and team spirit, and not about achievement or I'm worried that if I do this, I'm going to be penalized. It was the first time for me that there was a break in the mentality of go, 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 climb, climb, climb. And so as you talk about these saboteurs and the messages we hold on to and how they're constantly in the back of our minds, that resonates.
Yeah. What a great example.
So I'm curious, I'd love for you to share, how do you help your clients identify and name their saboteurs?
Yeah, so there's an assessment that positive intelligence offers, and when I put a cohort through, I'll ask them to do a self-assessment to help them have the opportunity to reflect a little bit and think about their top 2 or 3 saboteurs and why those might be their saboteurs based on the way they grew up and the way they were conditioned in the workplace, and recognizing those, what they can better do to manage them, to call them by name and to say, that's not me, that's my saboteur talking to me right now. And I can manage that and control it if I'm given the opportunity to practice that and do more positive behaviors. So it's powerful when groups go through it together as small cohorts. They get to know each other in a more intimate way than they probably would in other circumstances. It shows a vulnerability that they share with others, and it makes them better leaders, I believe, going through the program together.
I love that. I like I could only imagine the power, as you mentioned, of the group going through it together. About maybe a month or so ago, I actually attended a workshop over the weekend with a close friend of mine. And I'm not I'm not an overly emotive type. So to, like, express vulnerability in a group is definitely not my go-to. But we were at this event and I was with a close friend. So I was obviously comfortable to be vulnerable with that friend. Um, but part of the group, there was an activity where we needed to write down, right, some of our saboteurs. They didn't have that language, but that was the exercise. And sort of what's the stuff that is constantly playing in the back of our minds that gets in the way. We had to write it on a piece of paper. And then we also had to identify, like, replace it with something, right? Like, what's the opposite, or what are we going to say? What are we going to control? What's a new narrative? And then this workshop had about 50 people. And then we went from the small conference room that we were in, we walked across this beautiful campus, and it had they had a outdoor um, fireplace. And so each person, one at a time, stood into the fireplace and described the saboteur, and they threw it into the fire, and then they proclaimed what they were replacing it with. And so I remember standing outside watching this, and I was just like, oh my gosh, this is 50 people. It's going to take a while. And it did. It took an hour and a half or so for everyone to go through. But once you got sort of probably around person 5 to 7, we as a collective group just started to, like, share that the vulnerability, the how deep people got. By the end, I don't think there was a dry eye in the place, because we all realized, no matter where we were coming from, no matter what stage of life we were in, no matter what was going on, we were all dealing with these mental narratives and these saboteurs, and we could identify with what people were throwing into the fire and the context and the stories they shared with it. And at the same time, we were celebrating with one another the new powerful language we were owning and taking control of. And so as you described what you do in your workshops and the power of doing it as a group, And that small experience that I went through a month or so ago, I'm curious for the listener who's out there, what's one small tangible practice they could try this week, even if they're not in a group setting, or if they are with their team or with their family. What can they do this week to quiet the noise and increase clarity?
Yeah, I think there are a couple things at least that come to mind. One is to have some quiet time to pay attention to what you're hearing and recognize it for what it is. So, taking the unconscious and making it conscious to know that that's happening, that in and of itself is a powerful step to start to recognize that. And then to think about why is that voice saying what it is saying to me, right? Why don't I measure up? Why do I have to do this next big thing in order to count in other people's minds? And how valid is that, right? Do I need to listen to that, or is there another perspective that I might be able to include in place of that, just as you did in your exercise? And my belief is that we all have strengths and capabilities that are different as a set compared to most other people. And we need to value those more and leverage those versus trying to be like other people and mimicking behaviors that may have worked for them. So I think it's stopping, it's paying attention, it's listening, and then recognizing that there may be another way to listen to yourself, to speak to yourself, and to act differently as a result of listening to that voice.
When you were just describing that, what struck me, you talked about like how we worry too much about what we have to do to matter to someone else. And as you were saying that, it really brought home like the importance of starting with what matters to us first, like what matters to us about us. And so I'd love to maybe shift our conversation a bit to talk about the ripple effect of self leadership. And so, what shifts when a leader actually gets clear and grounded? As you talk about this being quiet, gaining that clarity, replacing those thoughts, being able to identify them when they do the work, when people do that work, what's the downstream effect on their teams, on culture, on performance, et cetera?
What a great question. So, for me, the transition is that once they recognize what motivates them, what drives them, and how to have healthier behaviors, they recognize that those conversations are happening at the same time with people around them. And it gives them an opportunity to plug into that, to ask questions that are curiosity based, which we rarely do in a hyper competitive marketplace and business, right? We're running fast, we're talking transactionally, we're going from one thing to the next. And what creates great value in organizations is to take the time to be curious and to have that understanding of your colleagues, to ask questions about them personally. What matters to you? Are there things I might be able to do to help make your life a little better here or away from here? And listen and pay attention and see if there are things you might be able to do that would be helpful for them. People many times feel like they're property, when they come in to an organization, that they're there only for their skill sets or capabilities, and that they're talked about that way as a head count, a skill set, et cetera. And we all want to be recognized as people and have interests and things that are different than other people. And I think when someone takes the time to ask those questions and appreciate those differences, it really, really can engage a workforce, a team first, and then the workforce as they start doing that. And that's not the reason to do it. It's a side effect, right, from caring about other people and wanting to take care of them and listen to them. You find, surprisingly, productivity gets boosted in organizations as opposed to thinking about that as time that's wasted by not focusing on the work at hand.
It's funny when you talk about that, it does bring me back to that pivotal experience I had in Brazil working with those leaders. I mean, I came back to the States really thinking, well, what would happen if we stopped pretending in the work environment that all we want to do is work, 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 and that's all that matters, when in fact, we do have lives, we have dimensions to our personality. And what happens if we stop covering, right? Like when I think about how many moms and dads in the workplace have fictitious meetings on their calendars just so that they can sneak out and catch a kid's performance, or they could actually take a child to a doctor's appointment and not feel like they would be penalized, as you said, because they're property, right, of their employer. Um, And I know for me, that experience in Brazil shifted how I led and how I was more forthright when I was going to pull away or I was going to sort of shut off the phone or not be on the computer because I had other dimensions of my life I was going to prioritize. And it made room for others around me to do the same. And so, to your point, it created the space for the whole self to come to the work environment and for it to normalize that we're all managing a broad portfolio of responsibilities and different hats. We're not just leaders and team members, but we're moms and dads and sons and daughters and partners and the host of things. So I that really resonates for me as you're talking about the downstream effect and what happens when we not only take time to care for ourselves, but we take time to care for others.
I think it's causing me to reflect on our time together. And I think growing up in financial services, and particularly in New York, that's a training ground, right, for putting aside the whole person, right? Because so much of what we did and how we were measured was based on how we dressed, what we said, who we hung out with, right? All these external factors where people look at that and say, wow, I like that person or I don't like that person without knowing who that person is, right? Because we didn't take the time to do that. So it took me a while to recognize that. It took me a while to unpack that and say, I'm not who I am because of the way I dress, because of the way I speak, or even because of the project I just completed. I am who I am because of what I believe, the values that are important to me, and because of the way I like to connect with other people.
I love that. And you're right. Working in New York City, I mean, quintessential time is money, right? So if you weren't figuring out a way to create money, you were wasting time, right? So I love the bursting of the bubble you just did there. I'm curious, right? Because as we're talking through this, I mean, the truth of the matter is, if someone was saying to this to me when I was, in my 20s and 30s, I'm not sure I would have bought it as much. I'm not sure I would have heard it. But I would have been curious, but not trusting. And so, what would you say to someone who feels like they don't have time for this kind of reflection? They're not sure that this is legit. What would you say to them, knowing what you know today?
I think we all find our way at a time that's appropriate for us on our journey. And I'm with you. I don't know that I would have heard this message and taken it to heart in my 20s or 30s, right? So I think the best you can do is to model the behavior so that someone might look at that at some point and say, I want to be a little more like Tessa, right? I wonder what makes her tick. And be curious enough to ask some questions about your belief set, right? Your assumptions that sit under the behaviors, and want to learn a little bit more in a way where they might apply that for themselves. But it is there is a maturing, I think, that goes on that we recognize now, right, at a certain stage in
Right.
our career. Sometimes you need to get knocked around a little bit to really appreciate some of the things that we're talking about. But the seeds can be planted early on, and people can see what healthy behavior looks like versus unhealthy behavior, and wonder enough about why that is to start looking into it and learning for themselves.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, right? Because as you're talking about role modeling, I mean, how many times in our careers where there are people who role modeled well that were like, okay, this is what I want to channel and what I want to be like. And I think of a guy, Greg, who I worked for in the oil and gas space, and he was just really good about appreciating effort. And I was coming from, New York trained mindset of I reward results, I don't reward effort, right? And I saw how empowering he was to a workforce when he took the time to acknowledge, I know you're leaning in. I know you're working late hours. I appreciate what you're doing to get this project across the finish line. Even taking the time to say, I want to thank your family and your loved ones for lending you to us for this long. That really connected with people. They felt seen, they felt heard in the trenches. And so, to your point, right, like having people who are role modeling high integrity, great values, what can we learn from? But I would imagine, and I know for you, similar for myself, there are also people who did not role model good intentions well. And if I go back to that sort of New York training ground, I found sometimes, people look the part, they dress the part, they talk the part. But then when you got behind closed doors, you realize, wow, right, integrity's missing, or they may be great at making money for this company, but they're horrible life partners. They're never around for their kids. They can't possibly have a decent relationship with their children. Is that my trajectory? Is that what I want for my future? And so I'm curious, when you think about who you can learn from, both the positive role models and the negative role models, what have you taken from that as well?
It's very different for me than it was early in my career. There are people that are held out as icons in the business world. For me, the best example is probably Jack Welch, right? Where he turned around GE and people hold him out as a hero, right? And the more I learned about Jack Welch, the less regard I had for him, only because what Jack did, I think, worked for GE at the time and may have been necessary, but the way in which he did it and the ripples that he left behind for other businesses have caused more damage than anyone will ever know, right? To go through force ranking and all the other things that GE institutionalized, and people looked at and said, boy, we need to be like them because they're big, and he's turned the company around. But only did people find out later on when he left nothing behind, right, to endure after he'd been a leader there. So I don't look up to people like that anymore because I think those people are elevated for a reason, right? Somebody's selling a book, somebody's making a movie,
Mhm.
somebody wants you to believe that they're bigger than life. I draw inspiration from people that I meet and work with every day. You and I worked with somebody I have a high degree of regard for, Jim Rush, who was the chief learning officer at Marsh, and I was inspired by Jim at the time. I continue to be, but there are others I run into where I see just that one kernel, right, of how they care about their family, how high integrity they are, what they do for their employees. And I get inspired by that, so my members inspire me, every one of them in different ways that are part of my peer advisory boards. I wouldn't have them in the group unless they had the right stuff. So there's something about the selection, but that's been terribly gratifying for me to watch what they do, why they do it, and how they improve lives around them. So I've got lots of heroes today, but for very different reasons than I did 20 years ago.
That's spot on. And I share that shout out to Jim with you. He was always a wonderful role model and someone who, when I left the Marsh McLennan organization, was someone I modeled who I want to be like. The courage and the boldness he often showed in speaking truth to power, and yet the kindness and decency in which he did it in. Left an indelible fingerprint on me and shaped, right, like the kind of person I was intentional about aspiring to be. So I share that shout out with you.
Thank you.
For those who are listening to our conversation and want to dig in and apply this, what's one next step you'd encourage them to take? Something that can move them from the concept of this to action.
Yeah, so I think for me, it would be starting to examine how authentic you are as a leader and how authentic you might like to be as a leader. So start to ask yourself questions about, am I being who I am? I heard a wonderful thing said at a meeting a couple weeks ago. They said, if you can't be who you are, where you are, change where you are, not who you are. And that stayed with me, right? That you need to be somewhere where you can be who you are, be vulnerable, be open, connect with other people. Find that place, right? If you're not there today, find a place where you feel like you can be authentic, and then work hard at it. A lot of people, when they think of authentic leadership, they use it as a cop out. They say, that's just who I am, right? And that's supposed to be enough. And that's not what I mean by authentic leadership. Authentic means being a real person, being a whole person, recognizing other people for who they are as human beings, and continuing to work at being a better leader. Authenticity is hard work, right? It's connecting with other people, getting to know them individually, sharing who you are, what's important to you, and finding ways to work together that add value for both of you. So I would say find your place. If it's not where you are today, find a place where it is, and then work hard at being the very best you can be, but not thinking about that as the achievements that you might make. Those are important, but think about what you do for other people and how you help other people to become better themselves and help their families.
Well, Ed, I have really enjoyed our conversation here, and I just want to thank you for your honesty, for the depth of your insights, and the decades of learnings you have gathered and have offered to share with us today. It's exactly what I hope this podcast becomes. It's really a space for leaders to take that time to pause, reflect, reset, and as a result, rise stronger.
Thank you
Um,
so much, Tessa. It was an honor to be with you today.
Before we wrap up today, I would love to invite you to share with our listeners how they can learn more about the work you do at Vistage Michigan.
Yes, thank you for that opportunity, Tessa. So Vistage is a pretty good-sized organization. We have 45,000 members in 40 countries. So most any major city that one of your listeners may be located in, we probably have chapters or groups. And it's a great opportunity for those who decide they want to take the journey to learn about themselves, learn about other leaders, practice vulnerability, and help others become better. And I've been at this now for about 5 years or so. And I love the model because it is peer advisory boards and people helping each other. And that for me is stronger in many ways than learning from people who are at the pulpit telling you the way things should be done. So I would say send one of us an email if they're interested in finding out more, or reach out to the local operations for Vistage Worldwide to learn more about their programs.
Listeners, if you're interested, Google Vistage Worldwide for more information to learn about your local chapter. And in addition to that, we'll be creating a simple resource based on today's conversation. So check out the show notes for practical tools you can use to take action right away. And if you're enjoying these episodes, follow us on LinkedIn or visit www.tessatubbs.com for more tools, resources, and updates. Thanks for tuning in, and keep leading with intention.